Future is looking very well, very good. Actually, according to not time glass, but spyglass technology,
Spyglass technology.
we
Okay.
were able to see a probable future that actually where the white hats win and they checkmate the dark hats, and I believe that that's the future that they secured in the positive timeline. So it's already, the battle's already been won, in other words. So the future is looking bright. But this old age conflict between good and evil, Tom, is actually goes all the way back, even before recorded history. We could, from my own research, I've actually traced it back to Atlantis. But and even beyond that, I traced it all the way to the galaxy. The same rivaling bloodlines of those that come from the original Israeli Abrahamic tradition and those from Babylon have been warring throughout millions of years, all the way from the galaxy. Like that's where these bloodlines come from. This is a galactic war that we're in the middle of. It's not just planet Earth.
Yeah.
And so in modern times, we could trace the history to the White Hats, to the Knights Templars. The Knights Templars were the ones that reinstated it and reorganized after about 400 to 500 years of suppression due to the crucifixion of Jesus, who was a white hat. He was part of a secret benevolent society known as the Essenes, the community of Qumran. And the community of Qumran were very, very secretive. They operated in isolation and seclusion from the rest of the Roman Empire ruled world, you could say. And so that's what the Knights Templars are. They are the reorganized descendants of the original Gnostics, or those that maintained the original followers of Jesus and Mary Magdalene and the community of the Essenes. And so there is a bloodline association. When you study the truth about what these Knights Templars were guarding and protecting, two things. The first thing that they were protecting was the lost knowledge of Solomon that they excavated in his ruined temple. And that knowledge, Solomon left all the records about the truth about the continents, the earth being a sphere, the solar system, the galaxy, the knowledge of the universe, and much more. I mean, Solomon, as you know, was a wizard. He was probably a demigod. He understood knowledge beyond. And that's why everybody came to him for answers, because he was known as Solomon the Wise. But the knowledge that the Templars inherited had the keys to the restoration and reestablishment of America, or the free world, that was left by Solomon. So Solomon knew that one day, thousands of years later, a group of his descendants would once again, have access to that information. And so that was one of the biggest secrets that the Knights Templars have been guarding throughout, 1500 years, throughout the Dark Ages, right? Was the fact that they had the plan to restore and establish the Constitution that was laid down by Solomon, by the way. The second thing that the Knights Templars were protected, and this relates to Princess Diana and all the operatives of the White Hat community, is the bloodline. The bloodline that they consider the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail is very real, and it's the biggest threat to the organized religions, if you think about it. It is the biggest threat to all organized religions, because by virtue of that, the descendants of the Holy Blood are the ones that are supposed to be leading the world as far as spirituality is concerned, because there's a reason why they're part of that Holy Blood. That is the bloodline of the Seraphim. Those are the celestials incarnate in human form. The angels, whatever you want to call them, the benevolent ETs, the Pleiadians, the Lyrians, Syrians, they come through that bloodline that was actually deposited during the times of Atlantis, if you want to go way back beyond the Templars. But anyways, so the whole point is this: two things they were protecting: the blueprint that led to the establishment of our Constitution, and the Holy Blood. And that Holy Blood throughout all of medieval Europe, throughout all the Dark Ages, was carefully protected by the Templars, because if it wasn't for that, the founding fathers would have never existed, because even the founding fathers are traceable to the bloodline. So we could trace our founding fathers through, Jefferson, those that fought for the Republic. Of course, Alexander Hamilton was an infiltrator. He wanted a centralized form of government. He was actually, controlled by the Rothschilds. He was, and the Jesuits who were running him from behind the scenes. So that is what caused the schism between Jefferson and Hamilton, right? And then, of course, we could trace it to Lincoln. Lincoln was also had children, and I believe even General Patton, John F. Kennedy, in modern times, Princess Diana, Trump, they're all related by virtue of being, coming from this bloodline. So somewhere along the line, they're all like second cousins or half cousins. And so that's one of the things that the Templars protected, was that divine bloodline that was going to, be preserved all the way into the 21st century in order to fulfill the prophecies of exposing the Cabal, defeating the Cabal, and then exposing them. And then, of course, ushering in a better world for humanity. So that is what is called Project Zion. Zion meaning, the free world, the concept that goes against the one world government of the Illuminati. Now, that's just tracing it back to the Templars. The Templars were the originators of the White Hats. Okay,
you just said it's Project Zion.
Project Zion, yes. So that was the blueprint and hidden project, the millennial hidden project of the Knights Templars. Later, when they were suppressed by the Catholic Church, who was under the control of the Luciferian Babylonian Cabal back then, later they resurfaced again. They went to Portugal, Spain, and get this, Tom, they even posed as pirates. The original seafarers were those that were protecting the Holy Blood. The old kings of France in Spain. Of course, a lineage of that, a branch of that went to Scotland and England before they were replaced by the, Saxon, the Corbic Saxon. I think that's the real Windsor's last name, Corbic Saxons. They're Germans. Their bloodline, again, is Babylonian.
That's Coburg, yeah.
Thank you. That's the original. Before they were replaced by them, of course, that was a move again, that was maneuvered by the Catholic Church, who was Babylon, has always been Babylon in modern times. And so they reorganized as the original Masons. They branched off into the Rosicrucians, which became a mystery school of ancient knowledge. And then, of course, they were the seafaring original pirates, and together they formed the Brotherhood of the Coast. And one of the main things that the Brotherhood of the Coast would do is every time the Catholic Church would send, ships to the different islands to get the gold and stuff, because they were always after the gold, the pirates would actually counteract that, and then they would steal the gold back from the papacy. And so at the same time, the pirates took all those treasures that they found in the old excavated ruined Temple of Solomon and put them in the different islands. And that's the reason why the X always marked the spot. I can't even say it, was because they were hiding their treasures that were left to them by Solomon, because Solomon, back then was able to accumulate a lot of the wealth during his times when he was, of course, king of Israel back in those days. So, from that point on, we had the founding fathers, right, that were continuing that plan thanks to the Brotherhood of the Coast, right? But then at the same time, the Luciferian Brotherhood, through Otto Weishaupt, who was a Jesuit priest, he creates the Bavarian Illuminati right around the same time that the White Hats, our founding fathers, established the Republic, 1776. And then so there was, again, an infiltration of the Bavarian Illuminati, trying to infiltrate the Masonic lodges, but a group of the Masonic lodges that kept faithful to the original Republic continued and branched off in secret. And they're the ones that held the tradition of Jefferson, Lincoln, Andrew Jackson, who fought against the central banking system of 1812, and then later Lincoln, and of course, leading into Kennedy and General Patton and Trump, and and again, they're connected also with not what's her name, Diana, who we know faked her death. So that is the modern day origin of the White Hats, and that's why the White Hats have to, in a way, have always played them but in secret. They've always had to kind of like also operate in secret so that they could, it's like a chess game. It's also a strategy when it comes to these two secret societies. And that's the reason why throughout all of history, you have had two, types of secret societies. But unfortunately, this world has ultimately been under the control of the Luciferian, Babylonian, Draconian secret society, whose time is up. In more recent times, another White Hat that resurrected, who was also part of the bloodline, modern day, the revival of the White Hats, where they began to gain more momentum and resources in the last 30 to 50 years, was Howard Hughes, the aerospace tycoon. He hired a bunch of beautiful women, and because this is what was happening. Other aerospace companies, like Northrop and all these other ones, were actually working in secret, and they were making all this money. They were getting all the contracts. So to him, that wasn't looking right. There was something wrong about that. So what he did is he hired all these beautiful women, and this probably gave rise to the concept of Charlie's Angels, because they were trained like CIA. to pretend like they were going on dates with these, cabal members that were part of like either Bohemian Grove or Skulls and Bones or something, Trilateral Commission, Bilderbergers, those are the ones that were, that were associated with, the dark, sinister black op operations and stuff. So these girls were able to, access and get these guys drunk, make them think like they were falling in love. And then once they were drunk, they use their mind abilities to get information from them. So that was a very smart move by Howard Hughes. And then eventually all that data came back to Howard Hughes, and then that's when he found out the truth about these black operations, these black budget operations that have been going on since the 50s. They were developing through the military industrial complex. They were developing a secret space program, and all that money was being funneled to build the interplanetary infrastructure for the dark hats, of course, for the shadow government. But that's a modern day revival of the white hats, starting with Howard Hughes, and then that's how eventually the white hats gained momentum. So there was several points in the last 30 to 40 years where the white hats had the upper hand, and they had all the documentation to pretty much bring down the dark hats. And unfortunately, a lot of the incidents that took place, like the Oklahoma City bombing, and of course, 9/11, were as a result of the dark hats trying to suppress that information, because a lot of these documents were held in those two buildings that were destroyed. So that explains that,
Yeah.
But that's just a quick, brief explanation of the white hats going back to the Knights Templars, and then their revivals throughout. But this age of conflict between good and evil goes all the way back to Atlantean times. So we have two bloodlines, right? We have the Babylonian bloodline, which is associated with the dark hats, right? The Cabal. And then we have the bloodline of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, who are the descendants of King David, Solomon. And of course, we have also the mystery of the 10 tribes of Israel, who, by the way, were the original Europeans before the dawn of before the dawn of modern Europe. There were the Visigoths, they were the Ostrogoths, the Lombardis. These were the different isolated nation-state democracies that ransacked the Roman Empire to their knees. But of course, history calls them barbaric tribes. But there was nothing barbaric about these, 10 groups that ransacked the Roman Empire. They were actually working with Project Zion. They were part of the Melchizedek, Brotherhood of Light. Again, later they reorganized as the Knights Templars, but this is back then when they were still operating, in secrecy.